So I watched So I'm a Spider, So What? This is a show that came out way back, and not too far actually. It's relatively nearby, but after 2020, everything feels a mile long. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is a show that is an isekai. It's very strange. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, in this video we are going to be covering whether there's going to be a season 2 right at the cuff, just to get that out of the way, because I do think the show is damn good, enough to where I actually want a season 2 and whatnot. Also, I'll be trying to entice you guys to watch this, or watch this show, so that I can have someone to talk to you about it. But that's going to be pretty spoiler free, and then at the very end, we're just going to take the whole lid off and it's going to become a podcast. We're just going to start talking about everything and anything. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, what is So I'm a Spider, So What? First of all, crazy name. Anyways, quick TLDR is that the general premise is that there is this girl who gets reincarnated, as well as her classmates do, as a spider. She comes to this happens relatively early on, comes to find out that her other classmates actually got reincarnated as humans, and all of these things. But regardless, the story is following this kind of like shut-in, of course, classic isekai person who has a good brevity of knowledge about video games and all these things. Anyways, she gets isekai'd, but unlike other shows which try to kind of like subliminally hide it, like Reincarnated as Slime is a good example of like there's kind of gamey things to it, but not like crazy. No, this whole world is like set up in a sequence that is very akin to a simulation type video game, I guess. So you hear really early on of like, here are skill points, here are attributes, spend your skill points. What do you want to choose? Do you want to evolve into this or this? So you hear that throughout the whole course. Anyways, the premise overarchingly is this little tiny spider girl is trying to find her way and try to survive, and that later becomes more, but we'll talk about that towards the very end. But alas, it's an isekai, you kind of know what you're getting. It is very much more on the joking, goofy, playful side of things, but also gets metal as hell sometimes, and like limbs are lost. But anyways, yeah, it's a little scattered, if anything. It's a little, like, I don't know where to put it, because it's kind of a mess in terms of the emotional nonsense that takes place. Bitches be dying, but also weird comedy skits are happening in the middle of a battlefield. Anyways, yes. Yeah, so with all of us being up to date on what this series is, essentially, will there be a season 2? I don't like to say this at the end, even though that makes most sense, just because I don't want to waste too many people's time, but essentially, there's a lot of weird up-in-the-air things. So this show, regardless of how people feel about it, did incredibly well. It was really highly watched. It was very lucky in the sense that it came out at a time when there was nothing really coming out, so that people gave it a chance when otherwise they might not have, and they forgave maybe weird CGI things when other times they did not. But regardless, this show was very much enjoyed by the populace, so of course it has a high likelihood of it getting a season 2, and I do believe it is actually straight up confirmed that there will be a season 2. But, this is the big but, when they are going to be able to develop and release season 2 is the thing that's up in arms. So, a quick Google search away basically told me that they're thinking that it might come out, season 2 might come out in 2023, next year by the time of this video being launched, or, and this is where it's like, becomes too much, or 2024. And this show came out a long time ago. It came out in, actually, holy shit, no it didn't. Oh my god, I feel like it came out in 2019, it came out in 2021. Okay, then that makes sense then. Wow. What happened to the year? Anyway, 2023 is acceptable to me. It's like, okay, that's like not that far away, sure. 2024 though, that's like 2 years, and we know how long 2 years can feel. So yes, I don't know, I'm a little worried on that front. But also, if you're wondering why I'm kind of like pervasive to it being so far away, it's because the show very much still ended with a shit ton of questions, which is frustrating. Anyway, but it's still a very good show, and I would suggest you watch it. But let me tell you more reasons why I liked it, as well as why I think you would like it as well. Now that we know that there's more coming, hopefully, most likely, so one of the things the show has is the power fantasy pretty goddamn on point. Essentially, it has the idea that you're going to constantly be leveling up. You're going to see this character go from a blip on the map, a spider in a cave that's going to die, and then exponentially grow into like this bigger thing. I'm not going to spoil too much. It's not too big. It's just like a much more power fantasy, 0 to 100. And because she's a spider, it actually does make it so that there's like a huge growth phase. So a lot of times, like the hero archetype, he'll go from like you look at him at the beginning of the show towards the end, and he's the same person, more or less. Whereas if you look at her towards the end, beginning of the show, and where she is at the end, completely different. Like completely aesthetically, all that stuff different. Very cool. To counter the good with the bad, the thing that I think you'll have to, it's going to be a hit or miss for some people. It's the comedy slash, yeah. It's the comedy slash execution of like oddness and weirdness that I think could hit the mark for some, and otherwise be a little too much or maybe even cringe at times point. Because yes, a lot of it is like, we're doing this now? Why are we doing this now? And then it's happening, and you just kind of gotta sit back, here we go, and we're doing this. It's like the comedy, the tropes, the like weird things, and they kind of make it make sense. Like one of the things, just to spoil a tiny thing for you, that I think gives you a good idea of what the show is kind of doing. But one of the things is that a spider essentially has multiple eyes, and they kind of extrapolate on that and having multiple personalities or perceptions within your brain, so that you can offload activities to your other parallel minds. So essentially, she has a mind in her head that's her OG mind. She has a mind that kind of controls her spider body. She also has a mind that controls her magic, so that she's kind of offloading work to each individual version or mind, so that she can kind of like compartmentalize, process more things. So very cool ideas, by the way. It's another thing this show does really well. Has a lot of cool ideas where if you like that, if you're like me and you love that, awesome. So if you like the 0 to Hero, very good show. If you like the crazy ideas in an interesting and weird world, cool ideas overall. Good fuel for your imagination, I suppose. There's a lot of times where it's like a teen girl just arguing with herself, and like it's sometimes really like clever and fun, but other times it's like, we're still on this. we're still doing this. Okay. So for me, it's a little much sometimes. Also, forgive me if I sound congested. I just woke up. But yes, it does seem at times a little much. If I'm honest, that's the one thing where I find I like her as an individual, but her comedy may not be for me. But I think they did a really good job about selling the character. And that's the one other thing that I would say I think the show does really, really well, is it sells, specifically, the spider, which she's the main character, we're spending a lot of time with her, all that stuff, and yeah. With that being said, though, and this is kind of like a weird thing that I've been encountering a lot, she's not perfect, or even, like, good. Yeah, and it kind of somewhat slightly seems like it messes with the overlord mentality of like, well, wait, if you were to strip away all human emotion from yourself, would you care as much about the values you had prior? Maybe you'd have the idea of values that you governed your life beforehand, that you'd have feedback from, but when you do the bad things now, you don't feel anything. You don't feel any negative, so they'd be easily able to corrode over time. That kind of idea. But in I'm a Spider, So What, the girl is kind of pushed in situations where she already seemed like she didn't really value too much of normal people's norms, I guess. And she was also, in her previous life, was bullied and was cruel too. But when she becomes a spider, what I'm trying to allude to is when she becomes a spider, she is pretty quick to do acts that I think you would do a double take, or like she's okay with like. And I think it's probably because it's a gradual process, because she doesn't just start fucking this crazy, I'm gonna eat and kill whoever gets in my way. It starts off as like, I need to survive, if you gotta die, you gotta die. And then it extrapolates later down the line of this like normalization of death, essentially. Which to me, it puts her in a really interesting place, because she is both interesting in the fact that she's like breaking traditional norms, but also kind of like, a part of me feels like she's kind of shitty as an individual, as a human person. But at the same time, and it's funny because I've talked about, like, for instance, the show I just watched, which is Combatants Will Be Dispatched, where Six in the show is a douche. Just a horrible, the whole point is that he's kind of horrible. He's a horrible person. But I think that's, to me, the weird thing is that, like, Six is unapologetically understood that he's not trying to be the hero. He's not trying to be quote unquote good in any way. And I don't think there's too many moments like that in the show where that's explicitly said or, like, cranked down, you know what I mean? So there leaves this question of, like she thinks she's doing the right thing, but in the reality it's like, I mean, yes, but you're also kind of horrible. You're kind of letting a lot of people die. Even though they're soldiers, they're all getting fucking obliterated. And yeah, also, and maybe it's my stupid self, but I always have if this is how I'm perceiving the world, how would they perceive the world kind of mentality. And of course, when you're trying to survive in a fucking dungeon, you're probably not going to feel that. So I'm clearly off here, but I can't strike that feeling. And I'm be curious to see what you guys ask, which I 100% agree with. The Spider is the most enjoyable character in the show, but I disagree with the fact that I feel like, I don't know, I feel like maybe this is fucked up. I feel like she's kind of a hypocrite a little bit, like there's something off there where I don't think she's like, I'm not behind her fully into whatever she's achieving. And we'll get into spoilers later that are relevant to why I feel that way, I think. But yeah, I don't have this feeling of, and maybe that's by design, because this is the other thing that I will quickly tell you as the last thing that I think you will really enjoy if you like this kind of trope within shows. But the show does this thing where it makes you question itself. So it puts up things where eventually you'll see that things aren't lining up in the way that makes the most sense, and there's a division of perception happening. With audience versus what actually is reality, aka a timeline. But regardless, that is the best thing that I could give on to you. The things that I think the show does really well is you'll probably like the character a great deal when it's done. I don't know if you'll like her on a human / monster level. But I think you'll at the very least be like, it's our girl, this crazy spider chick, because we've seen how much she's been through. And hopefully within the season 2 we'll empathize with the choices that she made a little bit more, and the lack of effort done by some of her people. Anyways, it's literally like the textbook definition of a zero to hero anime. All of those things, it's really, really good. So I would suggest watching if those resonate with all of you, to really like kind of condense some of the things I didn't think it did incredibly well. For me, again, you could have loved it just the way I perceived things. The one thing I didn't think it did really well is I felt like oftentimes it felt meandery. How do I put it? But it's crazy because it shouldn't. It feels like you're like, she's making ground. She's like fighting enemies. But maybe it's just her personality or her kind of hella laxed perception of things that it made everything feel like, okay, I mean, she's super calm. I mean, she's kind of just like, okay, well, we'll do this. I don't know. It just feels like the feeling of meandering around was high, despite she was doing the zero to hero thing. It almost made the process of like, let me get stronger, like nullified because of, I don't know. And maybe it's her personality, like just being like super chill. Maybe it's the fact that like many times in this series it seems like she kind of has weird plot armor but doesn't, like just because she gains a skill she kind of gets it's a way out, but then they kind of explain that because of a certain person kind of watching over her. We'll talk about that when we get to spoiler land. But yeah, and then the one thing that I also feel like they did a horrible job with, like this is probably my biggest criticism for the entire show, is I said that they make you give a shit about the spider, but we're also spending 24 episodes with a character, so if you're making it that far, you probably give a tiny bit of a shit. And she does have some personality, so she does engage with things in an interesting way usually. But every single other character I think is pretty poorly done. And I think, this is getting into spoiler land, but I think if you read the manga and you've seen the entirety of the story and then you reread it, it would be amazing. But for right now, it creates this feeling of like, I don't have the pieces to give a shit about you at all. And yeah, that's the one weakness of the show, but I think that might be because the way the show is laid out as a narrative is supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be the thing where like, okay, now when you go back and watch it, you're going to be like, oh, okay, and you'll be able to connect the dots a little bit better. Not completely. At least at just the first season of the anime. Okay, so I said that. I did say what I just said, which was like the narrative threads connecting each other make sense, and that's interesting. But with that being said, I also think that's if I could nail one more thing that I feel like is what I feel odd about, is it feels like a lot of things in the show are made to make sense regardless of other reasonable choices. So there's a lot of times in the show where characters will make choices that just are like, they don't make any sense, even though I know a good bit about why they're in the position they're in, but just not in the like, why not just say 2 sentences to explain what you're doing? Like, instead of just being like, nothing can be done, fuck it. And you're like, what? What? And yeah, it seems like there's a huge misstep in that way. But yeah, basically just, it sometimes feels like the plot is yes, made in this way that's supposed to be really creative and like intertwining, and like given like empathy and reason and understanding for people's actions later down the line after you maybe already made a quick judgment on them. But also it's like, well, why wouldn't this character make the best choice possible? Now they're just making a random choice that seems like it's for the sake of the plot. So that does happen a lot, where like she somehow lives, and again, they have an overarching thing that kind of makes sense, as if there was someone puppeting the strings and literally giving her plot armor. So that it makes sense, but that doesn't mean it doesn't take away the feeling of feeling like that. Like why? Okay, it doesn't really explain why she didn't do this. Anyways. Ladies and gentlemen, we're definitely at the point where I want to talk about spoilers, because I can't express why I'm feeling the way I am until I do. But regardless, I do think it's a show that's worth watching. I don't regret watching it at all. It's got a lot of episodes. It's pretty fun, especially if you are also into the Zero to Hero story. I don't really find that the main character... I find in some shows that the female main protagonist is used as a defining factor, and not just as, well, let's tell a cool story that happens to be XYZ person. And I feel like the show didn't do that. It didn't like make it so that, yeah, it was just like a human being you could empathize with, and also she's one hell of a personality, especially to have engaged with this reincarnation in the way that she did, which is kind of weird, honestly. The fact that she was like a shut-in mute, like didn't say anything to anybody, read comic books, and then she gets reborn and she's like, I'm the chattiest Kathy you've ever met. I'm like, whoa, okay. What were you hiding? Shit, suppression, basically. But anyways, I digress. Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to talk about Spoilerland. So at this point, I would suggest you would click off the video if you so desire, or if you happen to be one of the many who watched this show already and just wanted to hear me ramble about it, love you. Thank you. Sorry for so much baggage on top of us finally getting into it, but let's do it. Okay, so what I was saying beforehand about the like craziness of like the story not making sense, one of the first things I want to say is at the very end, when like everybody, like, they have information. So like at the very end, they're doing this war arc. The like vampire girl, who is already kind of like a sociopath, shitty fucking, I'm gonna like edgelord in her previous school life, so I don't really expect much from her. But when the hero, the main dude, sees his best friend, who now is like an Oni king, and the fact that he's like, sorry Shun, you're getting in my way, and then like just like stabs an elf lady just right through, and you're like, why? Like, okay, you couldn't just be like, hey Shun, or like the fucking hero guy, hey, the whole world's gonna end, or some crazy shit, or like we're in a simulation, calm down. Instead he's like, nothing can be done. I'm like, dude, you could just say anything. Anything would be a contributing factor for the inevitable information that's going to come to light later down the line. The fact that like he's like, best friend in the old life? No. Get fucked. Okay. And they do kind of talk about it to kind of give some credence to it, where like maybe they're like jaded towards the other heroes, or the other reincarnations, sorry. When like the other classmates that got reincarnated ahead of time, because there's a whole timeline thing. But anyways, the reincarnations that got reincarnated as monsters, I believe, just kind of came into it and being immediately, and they grow way faster, and they had way better consciousness way faster. And because they grew up in like monster scenarios where like they were being hunted by humans, they were being killed or something like that, or attacked constantly, that they have like a much more obvious, harder life. And they may resent the humans for not having to have any of that, for relatively having like this rather calm, relaxed kind of life, whereas they had to like fight and scrap for everything. But I still don't think, like, it just makes me like, what? When they refuse to just communicate. Like, I wonder why the spider lady isn't like, hey, by the way, all of my classmates who are, maybe in her mind, she's like, no, they're nuzzled away somewhere, they're safe, they're held by our captor, etc. Because as far as I'm concerned, in the last scene that we've seen from the anime, but was relevant to the timeline, the hero, the spider, basically didn't say that she was trying to like capture her reincarnations and keep them safe. They just said, don't kill them, just leave them be. So I'm sitting there like, okay, I mean, sure. To me, again, and this is the feeling that's like, I'm sure it's kind of rewarding, but it's also a negative. Like, regardless of if this is a cool narrative thing, in the moment right now, it feels really rough because we don't know the timeline. We kind of know the timeline. So for those guys who do not know, what you guys do, if you're watching this far and you probably watch the show, but I'll just kind of quickly explain it just in case people are crazy madmen watching it at this point without being like, I still don't know if I want to watch the show, I don't really care about spoilers, hit me, Grin. Okay, so the timeline weirdness of the show. You can parse things out, but it's still not like crisp or clean or answers the questions, at least to me, that I want answered. Essentially, the timeline is actually not that hard to understand. Spider was the first to reincarnate. There might be previous ones. We might learn down the line that there was another classmate that got earlier. Regardless, I don't know if there's many that had the strongest start that the spider had. So the spider got reincarnated as a monster spider. So that means she was cognitive and the ability to move around and think and process was higher. So everyone comes into the world, comes into being at the same time, but they're human babies. So the hero, the classmates, all those other characters that were born as humans take a long processing time to get stronger. I also think this is weird because you think that would have a balancing pivot. Like, hey, you're useless for like 10 years of your life as a child, as a baby. Here's a power spike because what the fuck? Whereas you got Hero just able to benefit. She's also getting murdered and getting like her arms ripped off. So clearly a challenge, but also she's crazy and like exponentially leaping and like starting fights with everybody, etc. She's built different, so to speak. That's where the timeline starts, and that's where the confusion starts to deviate within the story. So you're watching Hero at the very beginning of time when they first got reincarnated, but then we're watching the heroes way in the future when they're actually like a functioning human being, kind of like 15 or 16 or something like that, can actually operate. And that's when this happens. But Hero eventually unlocked the Taboo skill, which the Taboo skill lets you understand how the world is gonna end, as well as how the world ended beforehand, because I think the world was technically advanced at some point. Regardless, so Hero has that knowledge, and then she's still getting stronger, but eventually she gets to the point where she's so strong that she can actually make a difference, and then I think she starts pacing things out to make it so that they basically can save the world. And this is where the confusion gets really annoying, because they never really answer how they're going about doing that. All they kind of know is that, hey, the elf guy is bad, and that's where the humans put the bet on, and that's in direct correlation with Hero's plan, the main character, Spider. That's her plan's getting fucked with. But the thing that to me is frustrating is we don't get to understand what happened to the other person. So we know what happened to the vampire lady. We're like, okay, vampire lady did this and this. Gotcha. She probably mentored Hero, or Hero mentored the vampire girl, baby, flourished her, got her the lust greed thing, and she's good to go. But the reason why I'm frustrated with the timeline a little bit is because the point of Hero being our spider, like having just saved the vampire lady, and then being current day, I don't know what the hell, like her plan seems kind of weird, but also I kind of get it, because if you understand Hero, she's kind of like basic, like not basic, she's like a baseline. What is the net advantage that we are going to do? Okay, many people are going to die, but we're going to be able to get this, and that's going to stop the whole world from dying. Clearly a choice that we should make. Bang. And then she'll just do the choice. At least that's what I garner from her personality and character. But regardless, there's still moments where I'm like, could the one reincarnation that's not Hero, that's like the Oni demon, just be like, hey, by the way, guys, Hero is the person who knows what the fuck's gonna happen. The world's gonna end, and that guy who you're working for is actually a son of a bitch. Done. done. Like even if they're like, I don't believe you, fuck you. Regardless, there would still be moments where eventually, like, they would see a crack within the elf guy's armor, or like a crack within his words, some sort of gap that's like, oh shit, maybe they're right, and then they would be able to pivot. The fact that they're like, nothing can be done. Fuck them. Hey, my best friend from like another life, eat shit. I'm gonna, oh, this is your friend, stabbed right through the heart for no reason. And that's kind of the other thing that, like, so the whole show has and permeates, which I'm sure they'll build on within the future thing, also probably in the manga. But the idea that there's such a diss, like, you guys were, yeah, I don't, like, to me, just the fact that, like, they're just blitzkrieging things with zero remorse or zero, like, understanding of how that may be perceived. like the fact that, oh, here's my friend's like traveling companion, let me split her in half. Ooh, well, yikes. He's upset about it. What a bitch. It's like, what happened to you that made you just a cunt? It's the worst. Anyways, so that's the kind of weirdness with the timeline to me that's frustrating. Is, yes, I know when we probably learn the whole timeline, it's going to make everything sequence better, but it doesn't change the fact from it being confusing and frustrating to have experienced until we have those pieces or answers. I don't know how they could answer those things. Like just negligence, essentially, on the reincarnations. Maybe, yeah, like I don't know how they could patch that to make it like, yes, it was an awful idea for me to tell my classmates, hey, this is the general idea of what's hippity happening. Okay, you don't believe me? Fine. You'll eventually figure it out eventually. So that's just a little bit of a native frustration, but that's basically the timeline from my knowledge. It's kind of broad. We still don't know what happened within the arc of the spider coupling with the demon lord Arachnid and then, sieging the one place. We just know that Hero's just showing up and is like, what's good? The hero unlocked Taboo? He's gonna be in a fucked up state for probably months. That makes me want to talk about the other thing. The hero and like the classmates are awfully done. Like, I kind of sugarcoated it, but the more I keep thinking about it, the more I'm like, the only way that they could save it is if in season 2, if they kind of start jumping to the future and they show that the spider is now training the hero, because the hero is boring as hell. He's constantly like, we're gonna win, but just doesn't like give anything, doesn't like say, hey, I'm gonna sacrifice my whole fucking arm just to be able to stand by my ideals. Instead he's like, well, friendship. Friendship. And the spider's sitting there like, I had to fucking kill dragons and lizards. I was covered in acid. My limbs broke 8 times. Like, it's a whole thing. So I understand the frustration that could lead, but yeah, I just think they need to do a better job with like unraveling the hero things, because especially right now, with that being said though, it makes me curious, because I wonder what they're going to do in the future. For those guys who maybe seen the manga, I would love to be not spoiled entirely, but just given some breadcrumbs to be like, okay, hey, this is gonna turn into something. There's answers to those questions, Grin. I'm like, okay, I just gotta hold out then. The hero, now having understood, or now having unlocked Taboo, which Taboo is the understanding that the world's gonna come to an end and that that's all gonna be a mess. And specifically that the church hunts people with Taboo, probably because they know the end of the world's coming, and maybe that has to do with the church and the elf guy, and maybe even the king. So I think that's like the future books, is we're going to take down the elf guy, and then we're going to take down the king, like son or brother, whatever his name, blue-haired guy. And then we're going to have to take down the church and go in those kinds of orders. And again, the spider is probably strategically placing things in interesting ways. So the future of this is interesting, but to me, when the series came to a close, it just made me more like a little frustrated with, I feel like you could have just said, and maybe there's a good reason of like, she unlocks like future prediction. Like, because that's something they also talk about, is that skills have an exponential like level up pivot, so they can evolve into something way greater. So she has like, I think what is it, hindsight or something like that, or like future prediction, something like that. So she can predict like 2 minutes in advance so that she can dodge ahead of time. But if that exponentially gets better and evolves and goes to like level 20 or something, and then she's able to predict the future and realize, okay, I can't tell you this, because if I tell you what happens with Taboo, then you're not going to be able to get the one thing. Although I think you need to get Taboo rank 10 in order to get a deadly sin. So I think the one girl kind of knows. And maybe, again, they haven't really extrapolated on what taboo really means. And maybe the spider's in a unique position because she can kind of offset one of her minds to be like, okay, you're going to understand this and know what to do with this, but I'm still running the show. So I'm going to like let you hold that burden. Whereas if a seven, or like as if a deadly sin, for instance, Lust, the vampire, if she's seen what's happened and is like, I don't care about anything. Every human being, gone. every other person in my way, gone. Hate you to bits, you know? Because, yeah, it does seem like all of the monsters, and I guess that's the one thing that to me was frustrating, is all of the monsters seem like really, really big douchers for no particular reason, especially having worked for the one girl, Hero, kind of, whether it's subconsciously being with the other arachnid lady, which was clever, by the way. I will say I was not expecting that. I was not expecting them to basically like mind meld and do that. The show does one of the best parts about it, just if I could end it on one like really high note, the show does do a really good job about introducing weird ideas that you wouldn't think you would think of, I guess. Like the idea that how does she defeat the big boss? Well, we kind of got spoiled ahead of time because we know that she ends up working beside her, unless you can't, like, similar looking character? The other person? What? Basically, things are just surprising, like, pretty damn surprising. So, like, again, the fact that the big demon king gets defeated not by, like, beating her up or, like, doing the thing where she loses half her body, leveled up and comes back. Instead, she's like, no, one of my parallel minds just yoinked into their brain and just slowly started to convert her to be like a K-pop anime girl. And just kind of, we're doing that. But also the fact that she is kind of like, she is somehow mind melded with like a demigod. And kind of her demigod is now like kind of working for her, although, yeah, not really, but kind of. But also body jumped into that mind. Or jumped into her, so I could see there being that still abrasiveness to the execution of Hero's personality, which is cute. But to balance it out again, I do think that I noticed when I was watching it a lot of times, and I'd be curious to see what you guys feel about that. I felt like it was a little, and the best word that I can describe to how I felt sometimes is it felt like a little meandery. So like the meandering kind of like, it just like, even though things were happening that were like cool ideas and excessive and explosive, it still kind of felt like subliminal, like subtle and like not holy shit. And maybe it's just a testament to like the other things that nobody really talks about when it comes to an anime is just like the music, like the building up of a swell of an orchestra to really like explain the feeling that this person's having, or straight up just communicating with intent in the moment of frustration or whatever, right? Because it does seem like no matter what's happening, Hero is always like, her other mind is just talking like analytically, looking at the battlefield, and every now and again making a joke or something. So yeah, that's the one thing that I felt like the show, like even though things were high percussion happening, I sometimes still just felt like, okay. I didn't feel like, or like, ooh, like building up, like the Zero to Hero feeling is I think what people are hunting for a lot of times when they look for these shows, which is that feeling of like, holy shit, and they did it, yes! Whereas this one, it doesn't seem like it does that for me. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's because I've watched certain shows recently that's kind of made that all skewed, probably. Regardless, ladies and gentlemen, I got a little messy there at the end, I'll be honest, me trying to explain the timeline and how I was frustrated with the way that works. But if I could also just summarize that, I think it's just that I wish I had more information about why. Because yes, it's cool when you finally get to connect a thread to the past and say, oh, that's why. It still leaves you when you have like 500 threads in your hands, like, well, I don't know about this, fam. I'm just kind of holding all this shit right now until we can happen with something. Also, the show doesn't do, like, it does the Zero to Hero thing, and then it kind of made me realize how special Reincarnated as Slime is. Because it did that. It did the Zero to Hero thing. But it also did an amazing job with interfacing with, like, a bunch of characters. Like, a lot of the characters you experience, at least for me, when you're watching Reincarnated as Slime is, like, the uniqueness of this character. You like them, you want to root for them, you understand them, even if they're a little, like, cold-blooded or something, you get it. And just, like, the execution of unraveling characters seemed to be, like, isn't great within that show. But also, on the topic of Zero to Hero, reincarnates as a slime also does something amazing where it takes like the evolution process and just throws it on everybody else. In fact, I wonder if it almost seems like reincarnated as a slime is like a person who watched the Spider show, and I'm sure this is not true, but maybe. But it seems like a person who like read the Spider manga and said, "What if I do the good points that are in this show, which is the evolution of a monster, which is dope? What if I do the good job about like giving each one of these characters a fun personality, and then I make you want to root for them? And what if I have like multiple threads that kind of lead to this person's overall success? Meeting this dragon, being able to be empowered, maybe becoming a demon god, and then being able to offset that power again, and then have your summon still, and keep going that way." Anyways, and then like having this separate thread of building a nation instead of like taking on a nation, because that's been done to death. To taking on a kingdom, why not build a whole ass kingdom from the ground up? And that could be interesting. So yeah, I will say that's the thing that I feel like the show is kind of missing, is that zero to hero thing is there, but not the other interesting pivot, which to me, if they did try to have another one, it was like the quirky personality of like this teen girl who read way too much manga, which was cute, but not nearly as cool to me as like reincarnated as slime, waiting to see what the next monster evolved into, and what the next monster would, how Mamoru would basically win over another person. But I digress. Still a great show. Still can't wait for season 2. Let me know what you guys think about it genuinely. I always like looking at these comments because people have either they're like, "This is the best show ever," or they're like, I got bored, or they're like, "Dude, this is what happens in the manga," and I love those people specifically a lot because they help me flush out my perception of the thing. I don't really believe in spoilers, but I would suggest just putting a spoiler tag on the comment if you are one of the brilliant people who have actually read ahead and read the manga. But last, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Here's hoping that we get a season 2 by 2023 and not 2024. Although, yes, I do think as we get into season 2, hopefully we start getting more answers and flushing out the characters that we've kind of seen. Because, yeah, like again, I gotta end it, but like again, like the vampire lady, I hated the whole way through. So like all that they've done is make me hate the characters that are monsters. I'm sure to swing back around, but it doesn't change the fact that they're like slaughtering all these people, unless they kind of come up with an arc that's like, no, all of the elves, all of them are horrible, like just it's like complete snakes, etc. Maybe, otherwise they're still like, fuck anything that's in my way, slaughter it. And I'm like, this, yeah. Like we got the boring hero or the douchers who have like the worst sense of execution of actual plans ever. Like, yeah, at least it feels that way to me. But last, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for putting up with me, and goodbye, my friends.